Chapter 30, Smaug. There were so many things you could do with a stick. That's why Chet liked sticks so much. You could poke and hit stuff. You could swing it around like a weapon. But more importantly, at least for today, you could root out snakes. He hadn't seen a single snakeskin. He should have taken Davies with him and demanded that he point out exactly where he'd found it. That would set him straight. Only Chet didn't want to share the spotlight when he captured the real snake. That glory would be his and his alone. He imagined just how it would go. Him tying the knot on the pillowcase with the snake wriggling inside, then carrying the sack home like a triumphant bounty hunter. He would insist on keeping it as a pet, and once it was coiled inside its tank, he would call Davies right over and show him what he'd done with his bare hands. And that's exactly what he'd say, too. I caught it with my bare hands. Chet wasn't so sure how his parents would feel about keeping a snake in the house. He could probably talk his mother into it. He seemed to be able to talk her into anything, especially if his father backed him up. But he didn't know how his dad felt about snakes. Chet liked to think his father wasn't afraid of anything, but he knew that everyone had their weaknesses, even him. Chet would never tell anyone this in a million years, but despite being the bravest person he knew, he was afraid of dogs. Not little pipsqueak ones like chihuahuas. He could feed one of those to a snake, no problem. No, it was the big ones that made him uneasy. There were a few other things he was afraid of too, like the fact that he might not make the basketball team no matter how hard he practiced. He'd already failed at Little League, never hit the ball, not once. And Boyd Middle School didn't have football, so that would have to wait. Basketball was his best shot at becoming an athlete. You might as well be nothing if you don't excel at something. That was one of his dad's favorite expressions, and right now, Chet was batting average at everything. Basketball could change that. The snake could, too. That was why he had a backup plan in case his parents wouldn't let him keep it. He would ask his father to take a picture of him holding it up, the way fishermen did with their big catches. Then he would text a picture to Davy with something clever like, "So you found a snake skin, huh? Why don't you tell me the story again?" Chet mentally crafted a series of clever texts as he walked through the woods with his stick and pillowcase. He scanned the ground as he went, looking for places snakes might be, like big thickets of brush where it was easy to hide. "But you can't hide from me," Chet bellowed, as if the snake spoke English. He wondered what he would name it after its capture. What was a good name for a snake? Killer? No, too juvenile. Cobra? Too obvious. Chet said, jabbing a mound of leaves at the base of a tree. Maybe Smaug. Yeah, Smaug. That sounded both threatening and snake-like. Besides, dragons and snakes were probably related. When nothing slithered out of the leaves, Chet continued walking, yelling, "Smaug! Here, Smaug!" like he was calling a kitty. Each time he saw a pile of leaves and twigs, he jabbed and poked and called out for Smaug. And his heart didn't even pound. He was really made of some tough stuff. And then, swish! There was a rustling in the leaves, similar to what he'd heard when he discovered that girl Valencia. He stopped and looked around. It was hard to tell where the sound was coming from, but he couldn't hear it anymore anyway. He suddenly got the distinct feeling that he was being watched by someone, or something. "Hello?" he said. His voice sounded weak, so he tried to give it more gusto. "Is anyone there?" No answer. What if that deaf girl was hiding in the trees? What if she was putting a hex on him? He waited. When nothing happened, he rolled his eyes and mumbled, "Whatever." He poked the leaves with his stick and heard something, this time from the ground. He paused, poked again. He took a step closer as the toes of his sneakers brushed against the pile of leaves. He definitely heard something move in there. His body rushed with adrenaline. Goosebumps exploded across both arms, even though it was 1,000,000 degrees outside. He tightened his grip on the stick and swept away at the leaves. He hadn't expected to find anything, really. Yeah, he was on a snake hunt, but he'd been at it for hours, and now it had just become something to do. He didn't realize that he no longer expected to find Smaug until he actually found him. The snake immediately lifted its head. It was the width of a garden hose, but not very long. At that moment, Chet realized how little he actually knew about snakes. He knew how he would grab it, by the tail, of course, so he wouldn't have to put his hand near the snake's mouth. but he had no clue whether it was poisonous or not. Could snakes this small be venomous? How was he supposed to know? It probably would have been smart to do some research, but there was no time for that. He couldn't pull out his phone and Google it with Smaug's eyes on him. This was a once in a lifetime opportunity. The snake was exposed, waiting for capture. The time was now. Chet's heart thundered. Adrenaline, Chet mumbled, not fear, adrenaline. The snake wasn't doing anything, just staring, not hissing. It didn't sway back and forth like a sumo wrestler. It just rested there, head raised, almost like it was waiting to be picked up and petted, almost like it was meant to be his pet, almost like fate. Chet tossed the stick aside and flicked the pillowcase open with one melodramatic motion. He took a big, deep breath and moved closer. The second he leaned in, the snake reared its head back, and Chet wildly grabbed at its tail, which gave Smaug plenty of time to open air to swing around, one quick motion, and sink its fangs into the thick and ruddy skin of the bull's right forearm. It felt like the claws of a kitten digging into him. He knew what that felt like. His cousin had a vicious cat. But cats were one thing, and snakes were quite another, so he immediately dropped Smaug and howled, certain he would die in less than 5 minutes. His forearm turned pink right away. His skin burned. He imagined the poison traveling through his veins and attacking his heart. Who would find his body? That deaf girl? That retarded boy? And would they know how he died? If one of them found him, he'd at least like them to know that he died in a life or death fight with a vicious reptile. He cradled his arm and stared at it. The pillowcase was crumpled in the leaves like a deflated balloon, and he suddenly realized that he had no idea where Smaug had gone. The snake had vanished. Chet walked about 20 feet from the scene of the attack, searching for it. Then he sat at the base of a sturdy pine tree and waited to die.